I had hoped, I guess, to kind of go on the cheap last week and cover both of those chapters in a single class, which I felt I'd done successfully in the past. But my own evaluation afterwards and then feedback that I received as the course of the week went by suggested that these two chapters, being so extremely critical, should not be given short shrift. So I made the decision in the course of the week that we'd come back and look more specifically at objections, I guess. There's some more just fullness that I'd like to present, but much of it really is to answer some of the objections that I've heard repeatedly over the course of now 34 years. I've been saying 33, but I think 37th lesson now. We've actually gotten into that 34th year that I've been teaching it this way. So chapters 17 and 18, I'm going to go full screen for the next moment or two and show you the chart that we ended with last week. This chart had to do with the identification of the city that is called Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, in the first verses of chapter 17, but really the whole chapter and chapter 18 and a bit of 19 as well. So I showed you there that in 3 columns we have in these 2 chapters quite a number of descriptive terms which could refer to Rome and do in some cases, at least would fit. And then Jerusalem also, with question marks for both cities in those last 2 columns. What should we see in these descriptions, Rome or Jerusalem? So already in Revelation 14:8, and now again in chapter 17:2 and in 18:3, we have the nations fornicating, committing sexual crimes, is the way it's depicted in the vision, with this harlot. So whether you think in terms of religion or politics or trade, there's some sort of untoward relationship that's going on. So would this fit Rome? Could Rome be described as a harlot in the eyes of God? Could Rome be described as, consorting with evil and worldliness and sin? And I'm sure it could. And then Jerusalem, though, would fit at least as well. Then we have in chapter 17, verses 3 and 7, the obvious recognition, I think, if we remember it, that the woman and the beast are different. They are not the same. It is extremely important, as I see a mistake being made on this frequently, that we keep these two separate. We recognize that one rides the other and the other destroys the one, so they're different. This being the case, Rome cannot simultaneously be the beast and the harlot. But Jerusalem, of course, certainly can be the harlot if Rome is the beast, which surely it is. Then in Revelation 17:5, this harlot is described as the mother of harlots, which gotta get that word going, suggests that she has some age and she's had some success in spreading this evil that she's currently perpetrating. And I first heard this from Art, but I think it's quite valid that Rome is really a very young entity, certainly as a world-ruling empire, to be thought of in these terms. But even if you argued that we recognize that Jerusalem would fit far better. It's a lot older, and even in Ezekiel, 3 different places in chapter 16 I've listed there, she's already been called a harlot here and other places. So it fits Jerusalem much better, even if you wanted to argue that it could also fit Rome. Then number 4 in these descriptive terms we have in 17:6, 18:24, and 19:2, all verses that we read last week. She is a killer of saints and prophets and of the witnesses and bondservants of Jesus. Well, now, brethren, I know you can argue again that Rome, since it was her soldiers that crucified Jesus, could be held responsible, since she, at the urging of the Jews, was reluctantly drawn into persecuting Christians in the beginning, and that only later in 64 AD with Emperor Nero would he use Christians as scapegoats for his burning of Rome. But Rome, even if you thought maybe you could make this fit as an instrument rather than being directly responsible,
She is in Luke 11, verses 49 through 51, and again in Luke chapter 13, verses 30 through 33 through 35, disqualified. Jesus disallows Rome as a possibility, and with Matthew 23 in the mix, is identified surely as Jerusalem, the only city that can be held accountable for the blood of the prophets, as well as these others. Revelation 17:16, the beast destroys the harlot. Rome surely did not destroy itself, but Rome did destroy Jerusalem. In 17:16, this harlot is hated and will be left desolate and naked and will be eaten and burned, which Rome never did to itself and certainly never had happened to it by anybody else. Rome was never attacked and destroyed, never to rise again. She fell apart, as Gibbon's epic work, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, suggests, and all others, because the history verifies it, will agree. But Rome did, in fact, destroy in these hideous ways, as stated, except, for literally eating it, but ate it up nonetheless, Jerusalem. So Rome destroyed Jerusalem. Jerusalem was destroyed by Rome. Rome was never desolated and didn't do it to itself to boot. In 1718, the harlot is the great city. The Bible never calls Rome great. It does call 4 cities great. They're in my notes. Jeremiah, Lamentations, and in 11:8, Jerusalem certainly fits, though. She is identified directly as the great city in Revelation 11:8, which is the first time that this term even appears in the book of Revelation. So once again, Rome really just must be disallowed. In Revelation 18, verses 4 through 8, God's people are to come out of her for 2 reasons, both spiritually and physically. No one's ever told to flee Rome because her plagues are about to come upon her, because these events are shortly to come to pass. But that's certainly the case with Jerusalem in Matthew 24, verses 15 and 16, just as an instance. Then last week on the chart, Revelation 1 through 3, 22, 6 and 7, 10 through 12, and 20, all state that these events will happen soon, but Rome will last for 400 more years. So while I do see some verses, particularly in upcoming weeks, that will deal with events that do not shortly come to pass, but will later come to pass, Rome is an entity that will endure for another 400 years. These events are shortly to come to pass in these destructions, in this vengeance, in this judgment. And so Rome, again, cannot possibly fit that descriptive term. But in 4 or 5 years or so, something real close to that, Jerusalem will fall, and it all fits. So while out of the 9 that I picked for that chart last week, Rome fits one of the 9, she cannot fit, does not fit, will never fit, and we should stop trying to force her to fit in these other 8, where, of course, Jerusalem, automatically, easily recognizable, fits every single one of them. So now, that's where we ended last week. This week, we'll want to look more directly at some of these same 9, but we'll add a number of others to it, and then a great deal more specificity, just to try to really settle the issue. Brethren, for far too long in churches of Christ, and for a great deal longer in the denominational world, we've had people making a big mistake here, and it just needs to be fixed. We've got to stop seeing Rome as the mother of harlots who will be destroyed by the beast, which by virtually everybody's agreement is Rome itself, here in these chapters 17 and 18. We've just got to stop doing that. But nonetheless, an awful lot of people still do. And it's frustrating for me, to tell you the truth, though I understand it because I did the same thing myself. So I'm not angry at anybody. I'm just frustrated, impatient, I guess. 34 years ago, thanks to especially Art Ogden, but a number of others, Foy Wallace's commentary helped somewhat. There are a number of others that have fortified this as time went by. We'll be talking about Don Givens and his help a little bit later in this class. Still, so many are reluctant to allow Jerusalem as a candidate for the harlot, let alone
to accept her. And particularly in churches of Christ, we've gotten pretty hard-headed about that. We're resisting this issue. And I think we need to lay it to rest as best we can with two classes now this night, doing the best I can to demonstrate. And I think the principal reason for this error, among us at least, is because of this conflation of the beast and the harlot. We get a little sloppy in the books that I've read from my brethren, and in the tapes I've listened to, and the videos I've watched, and the Zooms I've seen, just not recognizing how very different these two are. So let's keep that above all else in our minds this evening. The beast is not the harlot. The harlot is not the beast. If we start taking descriptive terms that are applied to the harlot, we are not being very faithful or precise Bible students, not very careful contextually, when we start slipping over and applying those attributes to Rome. They're kept distinct in the passage here. We need to keep them distinct as well. The harlot is not the beast. The beast is not the harlot. The beast is Rome for sure. So who's the harlot? Now, there are several key descriptions that have caused the saints, especially, to stick with Rome as the harlot in these chapters. Let me show you this list. In chapter 17 and verse 9, we have these 7 mountains. Well, they say, that can't be Jerusalem, that has to be Rome. Well, I agree, and you'll see that in a minute, so this one really shouldn't hold us back at all. But in 1710, the identification of these 7 kings is a big deal. I start with Julius. That last week we did spend a fair amount of time on. That's the way they counted the kings of Rome, the emperors of Rome, the dictators of Rome, the imperators of Rome, and whatever other Latin, Greek, or English terms you want to use when you think about heads of Rome. The first century people thought Julius was the first. Later centuries don't define it that way, and so we've developed in more modern history this idea that you can't use Julius as the first emperor. It is mistaken. I hope I was able to lay that to rest at least last week. In 1715, number 3, how, they say, could Jerusalem sit on Gentiles, as if somehow controlling, ruling over is the way we attribute this word sit in its relationship to the Gentiles. Number 4, how could she reign over the kings of the earth? And that's a big one. It's a valid, it's fair, it's reasonable, very justifiable, it's powerful, it's compelling, it moves me. And I fell prey to it in the earlier years of my studies. Let's lay that one to rest tonight, especially. In chapter 18 and verse 9, how could the kings, and why would the kings of the earth weep over Jerusalem? In 1811, they argue, I think this is just a lack of familiarity with, uninspired sources and archaeological history as well as historical writings. This, I think, is just a simple mistake because of unfamiliarity with the fact that all of these commodities, certainly could be attributable to Jerusalem. Number 7, we have in verses 17 and 18 of chapter 18, Jerusalem made out to be a port city by those who do not want Jerusalem to be the harlot, or at least just can't accept that she might be. We'll see. Being a port city isn't what it says anyway. So I believe, brethren, that we've already talked about the first 4 of these. We'll talk about the next 3, the last 3, here in the bulk of the class. But as I was thinking about it this week and just really mulling it over, I know how important 17 and 18 is. I know how it tripped me up for years. I see how it trips up so many people still. I thought maybe for the first time, I've not done this before in the preceding 8 classes, but now in this 9th, I'd like for us to step back in time a little bit, think about the larger nature of the book of Revelation, and particularly the cities that are in Revelation. With a tip of the hat here to Charles Dickens, of course, Revelation is a tale of 2 cities that is really coming to a head and a focus in especially 17 and 18, and really to the end of the book now in every chapter. So let's think about the two cities in Revelation tonight. Again, this is chart work I've never done before. It's a little mini lesson I've never done before, so that those of you, and I think there are 2 or 3 that have actually been with me as much as 3 times before on this. Let's think about these two cities. So first time you hear about any city, when a city is mentioned in Revelation that is not one of the 7 in Asia, and even they're not called cities, it's just the church that is in. When you have the word city that appears on the page and your mind called in the book of Revelation to a city, it's in the form of a promise there, as you see in Revelation 3 and verse 12. I meant to come back to myself here, and I think that'll work if we put the two together. So we have in Revelation 3:12, I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God. Now don't forget that. This is the first time a city is mentioned. The word city is used, and it's a Jerusalem city, but it's the new Jerusalem city, and the new Jerusalem that's promised here, this city of God that you'll have the name of, this city comes down out of heaven from God. It's not going up into heaven to be with God. It's coming down out of heaven from God. And as we've seen, God then is going to live and work among them. So this new Jerusalem is what I'm counting the first city that's presented as a theme in the book. In Revelation chapter 11, in verse 2, and you'll note I put it on the other side, the left page of my little book there, we're going to have 2 columns because we have 2 cities. So in the other column, in Revelation 11, verse 2, John is told to do some measuring and leave out the courtyard, that is of the temple, which is outside the temple, it says in verse 2, and do not measure it because it has been given to the Gentiles, to the nations. This is the word in Greek for Gentiles, usually translated Gentiles, the nations. And they will trample the holy city for 42 months. So the second time we have a city in Revelation, in 11:2, it is called the holy city, and yet it's being trampled. It's a city that deserves to be fallen. It's a city for 42 months that's going to be trampled by Gentiles. What holy city was trampled by the Gentiles for 42 months? And brethren, that's the exact length of time of the Roman invasion upon Israel proper, the promised land, now modern Palestine, if you will. And then in all of history, these 42 months have only one possible identification: 67 to 70 AD with the Roman invasion. So over here we have a holy city, but it's trodden down. It's the physical city. And already you can see developing, brethren, it's the old Jerusalem, the carnal Jerusalem, the material Jerusalem, the physical Jerusalem. Not the new Jerusalem, the old one. In Revelation 11:8, you're maybe getting tired of this. I hope you have it memorized. If you can't find Revelation 11:8, by now when you're thinking about cities, then I have truly failed you big time. In Revelation 11:8, there are dead bodies, the 2 witnesses, which I take to represent Moses and the prophets. Their dead bodies will lie on the street of the great city. So now this city, third time a city appears in the book, this city that is called a great city, spiritually, that great city is called Sodom and Egypt. In 11:8, it has 2 mystery names, symbolic names, figurative names, representative names, names that call to mind ideas that you wouldn't normally associate with God's people, but now we should. Sodom, Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. The first time the term great city is introduced in the book of Revelation, we are told the great city in the book of Revelation is the city where Jesus was crucified.
So we have a holy city that's trodden down for the length of time of the Roman invasion, and we have the great city where Jesus died. Now, I've got to skip quite a few. They fall into the immediate category of these two same cities and none other. But there's going to start being some repetition, and so I'm skipping over really quite a few of these to get the unique identifying expressions or further explanation about one of those expressions. So I tried to collect, again, all of these distinct and identifying characteristics. 1619 then skips over some to get there. The great city, that's going to become a regular refrain and term that's repeated. The great city, what city was that? The one where Jesus was crucified, was split into three parts. During the 42-month Roman invasion, there, particularly in the last 5 months under Titus, that's exactly what physically happened to Jerusalem. And the cities of the nations fell, which had been going on as well in other parts of the Roman Empire. Babylon the Great, which is the great city, Babylon the Great, in this passage, has to be the great city split into three parts, and in this book has to be the great city where Jesus was crucified. Babylon now it's called. It has a third mystery name. Babylon the Great was remembered in the sight of God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. What city is particularly entitled to God's wrath? Well, it's Babylon the Great that we need to identify that's worthy of God's wrath. 1718 now, we get into material we looked at this last week. The woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. This is one of those great problematic verses. It got me for a while. It took me some time to figure out where my mistake was. How does she reign over the kings of the earth? But the woman is the harlot. The great city is the harlot. She reigns over the kingdoms. I got to get back to that. She reigns over the kings of the earth somehow, and we'll talk about it. But the woman is the harlot, and the woman is the great city. The great city is the harlot is the great city. The harlot is Babylon the Great, that is the great city. And Babylon, the great city, being the harlot, is the one where Jesus died and will be trodden down for 42 months. In 1810, now that's my parenthesis and in italics, it's the kings who are saying, the kings of the earth are saying, woe, woe, the great city, Babylon, the strong city. And by the way, at this point in time, it is arguable, and I think conclusively so, that Jerusalem is significantly stronger than Rome itself. I've been there. I've studied it extensively for a lot of years and then gone there, with an intense and personal interest in these structures of the first century. And a comparison to Rome reveals that it would be easier for an army to take Rome in this first century when the book was written, by all accounts, than it would be to take Jerusalem. But in the end, it took Rome's combined strength to bring Jerusalem down in 3.5 years. 3.5 years. That's saying something. But this judgment at the end in that final statement on the screen, brethren, it says in 1 hour. In other words, the great city falls suddenly. When the fall comes, this thing is in an identifiable time frame. It is clearly not the 4 centuries of decay that finally causes Rome to break apart, to disintegrate, to crumble. The idea of the great city falling in 1 hour doesn't fit Rome at all. In Revelation 18:16, the merchants this time, again my parenthesis in italics, they are saying, woe, woe, the great city, she who is clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls is therefore a very luxurious city. Now, anybody that doesn't know that Jerusalem was a tremendously luxurious city in the first century doesn't know much about Jerusalem and its vast wealth because of its control over an enormous number of people spread throughout the entire Roman Empire. Jerusalem was one of only 3 cities that had very large and influential populations of Jews
here in the time of the Roman Empire. Babylon had an influential group, and so does Alexandria there in northern Egypt. And all three of these cities, by the way, were luxurious. Rome was doing pretty well in these days. But Rome, of course, is luxurious. But Jerusalem's a fair rival. And when you look at the structures that Herod the Great had built, they stand in no shadow to anything in Rome, for sure. In Revelation 18:18, the seafarers now, the third group that lament the fall of Babylon the Great city, are crying out as they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, "What city is like the great city?" And they continue, "Woe, woe, the great city in which all who had ships at sea became rich from her prosperity, for in 1 hour she has been laid waste." And then in 18:21, we have a strong angel who says, and I'm hastening because these are pretty similar, "So will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will never be found again." So this old Jerusalem, this great city, falls violently, which Rome never did. And all Bible students, even among the Lord's people, saints in the Church of Christ, are just making a mistake here when they say, well, Rome never did fall violently. We recognize that. And they're honest about it. I appreciate their honesty. I try to emulate it, be just as honest. When I've got a problem, the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have some issues of my own where I'm not so absolutely certain. Well, I'm sorry about that. That's my ringtone. There we go. Okay, so I fell in love with the Andy Griffith Show in Mayberry a long time ago. And so it's just an uplifting tune, I guess. It became my ringtone many years ago. But at any rate, this great city falls violently, and my brethren know that never happened to Rome. And they admit it when they teach the book of Revelation. And yet they persist in seeing Revelation there. I just think it's time to quit. Now then, you'll note with the list of these descriptive terms for one city on the left-hand side and the New Jerusalem on the right-hand side, we come back to the New Jerusalem, a much smaller portion of the book dedicated to that. This events that were shortly to come to pass are going to include both of these cities, but they're different. Revelation 21:2, I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem. Well, the old one was called holy, trampled underfoot for 42 months and destined to fall, as we see on the left. But here also is a holy city, but it's the New Jerusalem. Again in 21:2, as we saw in chapter 3, verse 12, coming down out of heaven from God. Not going up to heaven, coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. My, oh my, we're going to have fun when we get over there to talk about that marriage supper, aren't we? So we have a New Jerusalem and we have a holy city that is the bride. In 21 again, verse 10, we have that strong angel showing John the holy city, Jerusalem, which has just been called the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. She comes down in two different places. In 21:14, the wall of this city had 12 foundation stones. And on the foundation stones, there are 12 names. The names on the 12 foundation stones of the new city, the New Jerusalem, are the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. This isn't Old Jerusalem. Old Jerusalem doesn't have literal stones with the apostles' names on them. Old Jerusalem wasn't built on any teaching or encouragement or activity, or shovel work, crowbars by the apostles. But the New Jerusalem, that one does. So what holy city coming down out of heaven from God is built on the 12 apostles as the foundation stones? That's the wall, joined to the 12 apostles. And in 21:23, this selfsame city, the new one, has no need of the sun or of the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illuminated it, and its lamp is the Lamb. The glory of God illuminates it. The Lamb who takes away the sins of the world and who was slain and yet lives
and is opening the seven seals to begin the book. This is the lamp of this city. So, New Jerusalem, the holy city, is the bride, which comes down out of heaven in two different passages, has a wall that is joined to the 12 apostles. I'm saying joined, it's linked, but built on the 12 apostles in the actual passage, is a holy city that is joined to the Lamb. Are these two cities the same city? Well, obviously not. There's an old one and a new one. What's the old one? Rome! No, it's not Rome. Jesus didn't die in Rome. Rome doesn't fall suddenly. Rome doesn't fall violently. The old physical Jerusalem, that's the harlot in these three chapters, actually, 17, 18, and the first part of 19, very dramatically say so. It's old physical Jerusalem, which is inhabited by Jews. And once the saints obey Jesus' command when they see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, which, that's Luke 21's quote from the Olivet Discourse, is called the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24's record of the Olivet Discourse, leave the city, then these unfaithful Jews who rejected their Messiah, they're the only people that are left behind in the old city of Jerusalem, where not one stone will be left upon another. And the New Jerusalem is the spiritual Jerusalem, the one that is inhabited by Christians. And we'll have correlating verses, substantiating and corroborating verses in Galatians and again in Hebrews, which we've already considered in this class, that will be coming up again in another couple of weeks. Pardon me just a second. I've got to wet the old whistle. Okie doke, as they might say in Mayberry. Okay, now let's go all over it again. 17 verses 1 through 6. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I shall show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the Gais, the earth," the word that would be much better translated land, and very often is in Scripture, land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, land of Israel, promised land, holy land, these kinds of terms have to do with the land that flowed with milk and honey. Now, the kings of the Gais, that's that word, should start us immediately thinking, well, are these the kings of the whole planet? Are these the kings of, the Roman Empire and its subjected nations that it conquered? Or are these the kings in Palestine, of which at any given moment, you could have several depending on the historical first century time frame that's going on. And then the kings of the earth commit fornication with those who dwell on, same word, the earth, were made drunk with the wine of this fornication. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup of abominations and the unclean things of her fornication. And upon her forehead a name written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. Now she has this intoxicating beverage in verse 2, and the kings of the earth are made drunk with the wine of her fornication. She is drunk with what I am pretty sure is the same wine. It's her wine that the kings are drinking. And so now it says, drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses. So, brethren, this might suggest Well, I'm sure the woman is the harlot is old Jerusalem and the Jews that forsook their Messiah. Those Jews did, at their forceful instigation, use Rome in the murder of these saints. So tying them together is not too hard, I wouldn't guess. But now what I want to do here is to first point out something I didn't last week. One of the seven angels in verse 1, it had the seven bowls. Please remember from chapter 16 and in verse 1, I heard a loud voice from the temple saying to the seven angels, go and pour out the seven bowls of the wrath of God into the earth. And the first one does in verse 2. And throughout chapter 16 and all the way down to verse 17, where you finally have the seventh of these angels pouring out his bowl, it's all about wrath. And I believe astonishingly specifically speaks of various aspects of Vespasian the father as general sent by Nero, and then Titus, Vespasian's son, who finished the job, and their actual military maneuvering and events that took place in the 3.5 years, which is 42 months of that first century invasion. So let's not forget that. It's the same wrath. It's the same event. It's involving the same city and being destroyed by the same people, which is Rome and that beast. Now, the harlot is the focus in verses 1 through 6. So the beast is briefly mentioned, but in the first 6 verses, the harlot is really the whole focus. And as I've just said, verse 2 and 6 is going to be the same blood. The wine and the blood are the same. And the wine and the blood are of the saints and of the witnesses of Jesus. So, brethren, it doesn't even really need any work or argumentation to see that the beast is Rome. We'll confirm that in verses 7 through 14. But this wealthy, unclean fornicator that we're talking about right here, this harlot is drunk with the blood of the saints. Her mystery name is Babylon. This is a third mystery name for a great city, the same great city where Jesus, of course, was crucified. Now, this time, I mentioned it just sort of in passing and only one small part of the passage last week. This time, I want to look again, the fourth or fifth time, I suppose, and 18 other references, to Matthew 23, verses 31 through 36. Previously in the chapter, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, Jesus has said repeatedly. He's just said that in the preceding verse. In 31, he then adds, you testify against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers, you snakes, you offspring of vipers. How will you escape the sentence of Gehenna, valley of Hinnom outside Jerusalem, bordering one of the walls? Therefore, behold, I'm sending you prophets, that's the actual Greek word, and valley. Therefore, behold, I'm sending you prophets and wise men and scribes, Jesus says. Some of them you'll kill and crucify, Jesus says. Some of them you'll flog in your synagogues. Jews had a lot of those, Rome not so much. And persecute from city to city, so that upon you will fall all. And when the Bible uses the word all, we should pay attention. Okay, this is a big deal. People, hold on just a second. I'm sorry, I just got a battery warning. And so, pardon me, I just need to plug my computer in. Keep reading. I'll be right back. About doing a soundtrack while I was off camera, something like okay, enough of that. So now we've got all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. The one Jesus is talking to.
I spent 5 weeks on Matthew 23, 24, and 25. Go back and study that this week again. Brethren, Jesus is laying down a law here. When we're going to talk about righteous blood that is shed on the land, righteous blood shed on earth, there's only one city that all of it is attributed to. That city is Old Jerusalem, physical city of Jerusalem, and the people who do the murdering up to and including between the temple and the altar. It's not a Jewish temple in Rome, it's in Jerusalem. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. And then the fullness, again, I just used one sentence last week, of Luke chapter 13, verses 33 through 35. I must go on my journey, Jesus says, today and tomorrow and the next, for it cannot be that a prophet should perish outside of Jerusalem. Well, the apostles were prophets, brethren, and there were other prophets in the first century and in the old. In that generation, all the blood of the prophets is going to be held against Jerusalem in Matthew 23. And this continues in Luke 33, 34, Jerusalem, that kills the prophets and stones those who have been sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, just as a hen gathers her young under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is left to you desolate. Jesus had already said maybe a year before he got up on the Mount of Olives to say that it would all happen in this generation. In Luke 13, it can't be that a prophet could perish and not have Jerusalem held accountable for it. Not have Jews in Jerusalem that were at the heart of it. Not have the Jewish leadership, starting with their high priest, corrupt as he was in the first century, their other priests, corrupt and perverted as they were. Woe to them, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, who could not escape the sentence of Gehenna. Jerusalem is held accountable for all this blood. It can't be any other. Let's not forget it. The great city is Jerusalem. The great city is held accountable. The great city will be left desolate. Now, let's get into chapter 17, verses 7 through 14. The angel said to me, why do you wonder? I shall tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her. Something else. Which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. No horns or heads on the woman. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, which is a refrain throughout Revelation we talked about repeatedly, I think it's chapter 6 in my notes where I deal with it, means the Jews of the first century who would not accept their Messiah, unfaithful, rebellious Jews. They are the ones who dwell on the earth, will wonder in verse 8, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast, that he was and is not and will come. Here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other's not yet come. When he comes, he must remain a little while. And the beast which was and is not is himself also an eighth king that is, and is of the 7 and goes to destruction, or to destroying. Verse 12, and the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, they give their power and authority to the beast. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are the called and chosen and faithful. So look at the screen here. I thought I did a pretty nifty thing. Let's take the woman out of it. See that? Let's take the woman out of this for a while. Verses 7 through 14 now shift from the 6 verses focus on the harlot, the woman that rides this beast, to the beast itself. They're kept very, very separate, the woman, which is the harlot, from the beast. But now we're focusing on the beast. So in 7 and 8, the beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction.
Some of my well-meaning, well-intentioned, very advanced Bible scholars, some of them, and good students, most of them, get, I think, hung up on this, and so they make a mistake. They can't see that the harlot should be separated, and it is wrong to try to make the harlot fit this right here. So they start going off the rails. Those who live on the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. So verses 7 and 8 are about this wasing and was notting and will coming. Okay? Was is not about to come out of an abyss. Was is not and will come, this beast. And it's a wonderment. So note that John's readers will see this. I'm going to go back again to that. I think this is important that we get the time frame nailed down. When the book of Revelation is written, there are people living who will wonder when they see that the beast, which everybody thinks is Rome, and I do too, was and then isn't and then comes back again somehow, will come. So how did first century people see this? How did they view this? Well, John's readers would see it. Now, number one, this was and wasn't and will be could mean that it's referring to the battles of Vespasian and Titus and their rampaging through Israel. In that, the armies came, and then we have the year of those 5 kings when Nero's king and kills himself, and we have 3 guys who take the throne, and not one of them can hold it for more than 8 months, and then Vespasian becomes the 5th, only he gets to keep it. He becomes the next real emperor. Galba, Otho, and Vitellius don't count, and in Revelation, I don't count them. They never really held control of anything. So Rome was vigorously at war with Israel. And then, for about a year, Vespasian heads off back to Rome to become emperor. And Titus isn't there either, but troops are still being gathered, they're getting ready, but the pressure comes off. It's not as intense of warfare, of battle going on. And then Vespasian gets firmly the reins of this beast, and then Titus, his son, gets much harsher on Israel and Jerusalem in particular for the last 5 months, and it finally falls. So maybe this expression could refer to the actual military activities. But, it also, Rome was an empire, I believe, under Julius, was not, went back to being a representative, or, a senatorial representative republic, and then became an empire again under Augustus, who'd been adopted by Julius. And that's where the name Caesar comes from, by the way. All Caesars, that whole idea of calling a king of Rome Caesar, comes from Julius, not from Augustus. But it also had been through something that these people might have lived to see, though most of them would not have known Julius probably. That's 44 BC. There might be 1 or 2, but they're aware of it. And then it was not, and then became again an empire. They would have seen the last parts of this, and so maybe that's it. And then we get a third possibility, brethren. It was a stable entity under Augustus and the first 5 of those kings. And then with Nero's death, it became very, very unstable. It wasn't a functioning, operating, system. It was really tottering. Josephus records it. People were afraid it was going to just collapse entirely. And then Vespasian takes the reins. All is well. And it's stable again. My point, brethren, is that far from Jerusalem, if we conflate Jerusalem, the harlot, with Rome, but far from being difficult to understand any of this, as far as Rome goes directly, we ought to all agree. I agree. Take any one of these 3. Rome fits. Rome is the beast. I'm arguing fervently. I'm arguing 3 different ways. Rome is the beast. Rome is not the harlot. Rome is the beast. The beast is not the harlot. So when we're talking about the beast, let's stick to the beast. Rome is here, but Rome's got work to do too. 9 and 10. Here's the wisdom, mind which has wisdom. 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other's not yet come. When he comes, he must remain a little while. The beast which was and is not, himself also an 8th. He's of the 7, and he goes to destruction. Okay. The heads equals mountains equals kings according to the passage. It says so. In Daniel, and I can't take the time to go back tonight, reference my chapter 7 in particular, we have heads and horns and kings and kingdoms. These expressions are used interchangeably in prophecy, both in Daniel and here in the book of Revelation, and can refer, like it does in Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2. In the last days, Isaiah said, the mountain of the house of Yahweh will be established as the chief of the mountains, now plural, and will be raised above the hills, which are the same mountains, and all the nations will stream into it. Well, now a mountain represents a kingdom, and in this case, the kingdom of Christ and of God, and the kingdom we're in. And these other mountains are physical nations, and thanks to Daniel, we know they're not going to last. The chapter 2 of Daniel tells us about an eternal kingdom, which is the church, and here it is, after Rome is long gone and Jerusalem before it. So we might think of these mountains being heads and kings and kingdoms in that sense, just to begin with. And let's talk about now these 7 hills. I think I share a really tiny amount of culpability in misleading some of my brethren maybe on this deal. And when we think about Jerusalem's involvement, I used to think of Jerusalem as sitting on 7 hills too, and did a little conflating on my own back in the old days. You could argue that. And in fact, I forget which commentator actually does. I've seen a couple of commentators, maybe Foy Wallace, somebody else, it might be Don Gibbons now I think about it, I'm not sure, actually names those hills. But now I think it more likely, since the focus is on the beast, that it references Rome's hills directly. So I'm sorry if I kind of threw anybody off the track and confused the issue, talking about Jerusalem sitting on 7 hills. Let's just forget about that and get rid of that. I've always thought this was Rome that's represented by the beast. It is Rome. Rome did sit on 7. I'm not going to make the harlot and Rome the same. So I'm not arguing that the harlot sits on 7 hills. I'm arguing that Rome did, the city itself. And surely these are the kings here, these 5, and one that's aren't and one that is and one that's coming. These are the kings on page 8 of my syllabus. So I've mentioned this before, and as I said, I really hope you'll look at it. I did an awful lot of work on it. I do think it's helpful for you to see these overseers and rulers over Rome, their ruling dates, and a whole lot of information about them that's in 2 segments, ending with the bold part on how they died. So number 1 is Julius Caesar. That's the way they counted him. Josephus does at least twice in the 1st century. Augustus is number 2. Tiberius is 3. Gaius, usually called Caligula, is 4. Claudius is number 5. And Nero is the one that is the 6th. You see question marks. Galba, Otho, and Vitellius never really reigned and don't deserve a number. So I'm not counting them here. You can call that a weakness in my view. I understand it. I've wrestled with it for many hours, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it because brethren, it fits. It works. It makes sense. It's not just a ploy, or a cheap way to get out of a problem. It's a fact. They didn't really reign. They were laying claim, couldn't defend it and back it up, and died shortly. None of them, lasted, so they just call it the year of the 4 or 5 kings, depending on which historian you're reading. And then Vespasian would be number 7. That's the way it worked. And his son Titus is the 8th. And it's his father that starts a new empire. Vespasian is the one to come who is in the land only a little while and then goes back to Rome to become emperor. Brethren, it fits. And I'm not making it fit. I'm not running away and hiding from anything. Some parts a little more obscure, so I'm not going to count Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. But I dare you to make it work any other way counting them. Go ahead. Call me up. I'm going to expect you to be armed to the hilt and have a decent argument so I can knock it down and be impressive. Let's get this straight. I know the difficulties of both sides. I know all the corners of this. So let's talk. And I'll be, nice to you. By the way, I think Vespasian there is actually spelled with 3 A's and not an O in there at the end. So maybe I'll have to fix that too. All right. But it fits. It all fits. Verse 11, the beast which was and is not as himself, also an eighth, and is one of the seven, goes to destruction or destroying. I can't get into the Greek thing tonight. But whether he goes to, eventual destruction, along with Rome or not is fine. I don't care. Take it that way. He himself gets destroyed then. We're still talking about Rome and its emperors in the 1st century and not later, not in any other century, and we don't need to go to any other century. You will be forcing it if you take this out of the 1st century. I accuse you, if you see Rome in this passage outside the 1st century, of twisting, abusing, forcing, and misusing this passage. You've got a great deal more problems with it than I do, baby. So bring them on. You think you've got an argument, but you don't. I may have some tiny portions that aren't very clear, and I'll admit them. But all the rest of it is just mountainously solid. So it fits. Vespasian is both the 7th and the 8th in this odd expression, in that he's the 7th, actually, and the founder of a new dynasty. His sons Titus and then Domitian, both of them, will become emperors, and I think it's as simple as that. He establishes the new family line and dynastic line, and is therefore an 8th and a 9th and a 10th and whatever, as long as the Flavian line endures. He's the guy that starts it all, and then, the kids are reigning in his name, and therefore he has some measure of being a part and in them and of them. In 12 through 14 of 17, the 10 horns, which you saw, are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for a brief period of time, 1 hour. These have one purpose. They give their power and authority to the beast, will wage war against the Lamb. Lamb will overcome him because he's Lord of Lords, King of Kings, and those who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. These are, of course, and obviously, the conquered and tributary nations that participated both in the destruction of the Jews in Jerusalem as well as future persecutions of Christians. Here is yet another, for you realized eschatologists, your particular mistake, of a passage that is not immediately, that is not soon to come to pass, and speaks of events that will go on down through time beyond the 1st century. See my notes. So sure, these persecutions are going to take place. But the city that falls soon and meets all these qualifications is Jerusalem. And the city that eventually crumbles and doesn't hardly meet any of these qualifications in 17 and 18, certainly doesn't fall violently or quickly, is Rome. So they're 2 different cities, and Rome is the beast, Jerusalem is the harlot. And that beast will endure for 400 more years, not soon to pass away at all. 15 and 16 of chapter 17, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. 10 horns which you saw in the beast hate the harlot, will make her desolate and naked, will eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. They're going to consume her in every way. Well, brethren, as my daddy used to say, for crying out loud, Larry, well, what else can it be? This is Rome, and Jerusalem is the harlot. My daddy used to also say if it was a snake, it'd bit you. So by now, brethren, I don't even want to argue this stuff, and I'm already, at 8 o'clock, so let's just rush on. The last 2 verses in chapter 17 say, God has put it in their hearts to execute these tributary nations, these 10 kings, his purpose by having a common purpose, destroy Jerusalem, and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. These are the Old Testament prophets as well as the New, and of course that's not difficult to see. But brethren, the woman in verse 18, the last verse of chapter 17, whom you saw is the great city where their Lord was crucified.
You were already told what the great city is. Don't forget it, and don't you dare deny it. We're going to study a book in its context, and you better accept what it says. If it tells you what the great city is, don't go substituting some other that can only meet just a couple of these identifiers in chapter 17 and 18. Keep the woman and the harlot separate. The woman is the great city where the Lord died. It's crucified. And it reigns over the kings of the earth. Now, this is the last biggie. It's come up twice already in this chapter. I saved it for this last statement. It's maybe the biggie. I think it's the one that bugs my brethren and trips them up. You know, they just stumble all over themselves because they can't figure out how Jerusalem reigned over the kings of the earth. Well, first, Jerusalem, those religious leaders, the high priests, held a lot of power and sway to the point they could get the Messiah murdered, on that fateful day by pushing the kings of the land around, the kings of Israel around, the kings of the Gace around. Those that destroyed that land had a lot of power in pushing the Roman kings around, the puppet kings, Herod the Great and Antipas and Agrippa II. Now, number two, there are Jews throughout the whole Roman Empire, and they were a problem everywhere. But they would all kowtow to Jerusalem. The high priest was in Jerusalem. They'd make their yearly pilgrimages 3 times to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was reigning over the kings of the whole Roman Empire. If you want to go that route, fine. That fits too. Throughout the empire, the Jews would never bow. They'd die first. They'd start a war, then give up their religious ideas, often very mistaken, but nonetheless certainly held to, throughout the Roman Empire. So Jerusalem reigning over them, ruling over them, directing them throughout the Roman Empire was causing trouble everywhere, not just in Israel, but throughout the Roman Empire. They're stubborn and they get their way a lot. Now think about this. This 3 and 4, I've kind of conflated, I guess. But brethren, they were allowed to keep their religion. They were allowed to keep their temple. They were allowed to keep their priests, though Rome did butt into that a little, with the appointments. Still, the Jews did have their own descendant priest and then could manipulate the others in Caiaphas and Annas and Caiaphas. So this is somewhat unique. Rome would allow some countries to keep their temples and all that. I understand. But brethren, the Jews were the only nation that did not have to participate in Roman military service. And there's a pretty good reason for it. Most wars do get fought on Saturdays. And if you got guys that you've conscripted into the service that'll die first, then fight for you out in some foreign country somewhere on the Sabbath day, they're lousy militarily. And they just won't fight. So they held sway. They reigned in that sense. This word doesn't have to mean you sat on a throne. You have control. You have oversight. You can give orders. You can make people bend to your will. This is what Jerusalem did. This is what the harlot did. I think it's primarily focused on the kings in the land, in the Gace, in Israel proper. But brethren, I'm still right. Even if you extend it out into the rest of the Roman Empire. Can you say that about Rome? That you can point at some of these identifiers and I can say, here's 3 ways how that fits. Here's 3 ways how that fits. Here's 5 ways how that one fits. All limited to the first century, which fits the time frame and the people to whom the book was given. Never forget that when the last verse of chapter 17 says, in verse 18, the woman you saw is the great city, you were told what that city is in 11:8, where their Lord was crucified. Now we're going to wrap this up, not too many minutes over an hour. By the way, I want to retroactively proclaim that this class is not a 60-minute class. It will always be over an hour. But so far, it's never been a full 90 minutes, which most of my classes for years and years under Lowell Williams were back in the 70s, so I'm still giving you guys a pass. I'm treating you lighter than that, whip-wielding taskmaster that I studied under. So, chapter 18, I just want to sum up the statements there, which really caused a lot of problems for my brethren, by picking at them a second time. We did it last week in this manner. Chapter 18, let's just look at verses 4 and 5. I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins, and that you may not receive of her plagues, for her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities." Look at verse 20 in chapter 18. "Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her." Look at verse 24. "All in her was found the blood of prophets, saints, and all who have been slain on the earth," that is, in the land. Look at verses 19, 1 and 2. "Multitude in heaven, hallelujah, salvation and glory and power belong to our God, because his judgments are true and righteous. He has judged the great harlot, who was corrupting the land, the gates, the earth, with her fornication, and has avenged the blood of his bondservants on her." Revelation 6, 9, 10, and 11. This whole book is the answer to that prayer. And those martyred saints were told they would only wait a little while for it. I have quit trying to see the eventual crumbling of Rome 400 years later as being representative of the answer to this prayer. It's not. They're not the people guilty of the blood. They don't fall the same way. Most of these, you can't even argue. Descriptive phrases in 17 and 18 apply to her. So chapter 18 does neither. The harlot is the old Jerusalem. It is not Rome. If it'd been a snake, it'd bit you. Now chapter 18, verse 4 again. "Come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins, and that you may not receive of her plagues." The plagues in the book are the vengeance the saints asked for in chapter 6. Get out of Rome so you don't have those plagues fall on you. And Jesus told you how, and he told you when, and he told you why, and he told you where in Matthew 23, 24, and 25. Look at verse 10 in chapter 18. "Standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, in 1 hour your judgment has come." In 18, they saw the smoke of her burning. What city's like the great city? And in 21, a strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, "Thus will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will not be found any longer." The very people who are still teaching that the harlot is Rome admit, I got it and can direct it to a recent one, online, and they say Rome, it's Rome, and admit that it never happened that way to Rome. It's not Rome. So, brethren, we'd already talked about the first 4 last week, I hope effectively. Did the kings weep over Jerusalem in 18:9? Sure they did. In 18:11, had Jerusalem been buying all this stuff that's listed? Sure they did. And Jerusalem was not a port city is no argument. Let me show you why. The kings of the earth wept over Jerusalem. Brethren, it was the end of Herod the Great's kingdom. He had nothing to reign over anymore. His grandson begged the Jews not to fight and told them they couldn't win. We read from Josephus. Taxation was greatly reduced. Of course, the kings of Israel, as well as future kings of Rome, now that you've killed and enslaved all these people, aren't paying their taxes anymore. You crippled us too when you pulled that stunt. They would pay a price for the fall of Jerusalem because the commerce was terribly reduced. Number 6, in 1811, Jerusalem, of course, was buying all of this stuff. Now, here is a book I got from Don Givens personally, as a matter of fact. I know Don. Revelation Revealed, an exegetical commentary of the final book of the Bible. I keep get it to go. But that's it. Okay, great little work. And, you know, it's not any hardly much bigger than my syllabus, so they make great companion volumes. You know, I highly suggest you get a copy. This one's from 2001. You know, I just lied. I realized I got this from Jerry Bassett's estate when he passed away. I preached his funeral, so I know Don, but I guess he didn't get it from Don. I got this one, or this copy anyway, from Jerry Bassett upon his passing. But I want to read this now about the merchant stuff. It seems to be such a big deal for my brethren. This is Don Givens. The second and largest group of mourners, in chapter 18, he says, is comprised of the merchants of the land weeping because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Verses 11 through 16. Jerusalem had become quite wealthy in material goods in the first century. The historian Josephus has many references to this as a fact. And he gives one in the Jewish War, book 5, chapter 5, paragraphs 4 and 6. The wealth of Jerusalem, Don continues, was a direct result of the blessings promised in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. God had made her a great commercial center, but she had abused the gift. Remember how God promised great riches to those entering the land of milk and honey, and he warned them not to forget him who gave it to them. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9 and 23 as well. And chapter 6, verse 12, Don cites, and many others might be added. Continuing with Don's quote. While there are similarities between the lists of goods, or excuse me, I'm sorry, here it is. Foreign trade had a great influence on the holy city, and the temple drew the largest share. The chief items were food supplies, precious metals, luxury goods, and clothing materials. That last sentence is a quote that Don Givens gives us from J. Massingberd Ford, who wrote Revelation, Introduction, Translation, and Commentary, page 305. For a listing of the wealth of Jerusalem, apparently she added, confer 1 Chronicles 29, verses 2 through 5. So, end quote. I got to get a copy of this commentary by J. Massingberd Ford. Massingberd is, Massingberde, Ford, J. Massingberd Ford, Revelation, Introduction, Translation, and Commentary. Got to get me a copy of this. I've heard others reference it, but I don't have one yet. Continuing with Don's quote, Alfred Edersheim, if you don't know him, you should. Alfred Edersheim describes Jerusalem's great wealth and extensive commerce carried on with many foreign nations in his book, The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. Great classic work. Volume 1, page 116. The listing of trade goods in verses 12 through 13, Don continues, divides into several sections. He gives 7 of them, generally of 4 items each. But the catalog-like enumeration concludes with a shock. Number 1, cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls. Number 2, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet. Number 3, every kind of citron wood, ivory, objects of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble. That's a good deal more than 4. Number 4, cinnamon, incense, perfume, and frankincense. Number 5, wine, olive oil, fine flour, and wheat. Sheep, cattle, horses, chariots, and bodies. Number 6. Number 7, souls of men. And souls of men? Don emphasizes with, an exclamation point and a question mark. Could this be a reference to Jerusalem's spiritual bondage on men's souls, of men's souls? The Apostle Paul said that the present Jerusalem is in slavery with her children, while the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother. In Galatians 4, verses 25 and 26. God had given the covenant people much wealth, but they abused it, and the people were in spiritual bondage. So that's page 97 of Don's fine work. Give him a shot. And then lastly, number 7, 18 verses 17 and 18. Jerusalem was not a port city, so why would these sailors and ocean goers, be so upset? 1817 has the shipmaster, every passenger and sailor, and those who make their living by the sea with all their woe. And my answer to that, as you can see, is, well, so what?
It doesn't say it was a port. It just says the guys that would carry cargoes by boat were upset. Well, the guys that carried cargoes by land were already upset. Doesn't have to be the people that lived in the city. It's the guys that trade with the city. So I said, so what? Because look, brethren, Denver's not a port either. How much world commerce by ship on the seas after it traveled by land would be interrupted if Denver got smoked tomorrow? A lot. Would major cities all across the whole planet be upset at the loss of income if Denver was burned to the ground and not one stone was left upon another of their city hall? Well, of course! So, brother, just to me, at this point, you're really getting desperate. When you're trying to go, well, Jerusalem's not a seaport, so it can't be, upsetting the harbor master of some other city. Brethren, I think that while Rome was a port city, though it's several miles inland, on the Tiber River, I'll give them that, and I used to not to in earlier versions of my studies here. I was pretty ignorant too, and I was growing and learning. So I'm not trying to argue now, directly that Jaffa or Ptolemais, even though Josephus does mention Ptolemais and how much, went through that port. True. Rome was a lot closer to the beach than Jerusalem was. So what? So what? All over the then known world of the Roman Empire, thanks to the Pax Romana, you have trading done by land and by sea, and Jerusalem was involved with all of it. I've seen somewhere where Josephus himself had slaves. Don't argue the Jews didn't have slaves. The Jews had slaves. Everything in the lists of chapter 18 and 19, Jerusalem absolutely engaged in. You cannot argue that it didn't. And even if you did, if you could take one or two of them off the table, the only reason you could is because we just don't have the record of their doing it today. It was a long time ago. But, brethren, it's the only city possible according to Jesus. So I'm done. I went 8 hours, or an hour and 20 minutes this time. That's two of them here. And I guess I'll leave that up with these two chapters. Brethren, I'm real sure about it. I'm dogmatic because I've been studying this thing for 34 years. You get confident if you get serious in your study. So don't wave it off. Don't get tired of it. Don't neglect it. What is it, 8%, I think it was, of the entire New Testament. 22 chapters. If you're not studying it regularly, it's about time you thought of as highly of it as God does. It should be studied as much as any other book, at least equally. But it's bigger than most, so it probably deserves even more attention than others do. If you, in your private studies, be you elder, deacon, preacher, just saint at large, if you're not spending a lot of time on a book that consumes a lot of the New Testament, then you're making a mistake. Get proportional in your studies. And when you do, that harlot ain't gonna be Rome. It's Jerusalem, isn't it? Yup. Sure enough. Sandy Griffith here, signing off. Good old Sheriff Taylor. Come see me, but be loaded for bear if you don't think so. Love you all. See you later.